Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So today we're going to start. It's just one hadith, but it has a lot to do with mental illness, and it will discuss a number of different things and how does Islam actually help us in dealing with mental illness. So I will be participating in a lecture inshallah about this where I would go in detail, but I think you know this hadith just talks about it from a different angle. So I'm going to start with the hadith and then we're going to go into the details of discussing it. So the hadith goes as follows. The Prophet ﷺ was with Abdullah ibn Abbas, and Abdullah ibn Abbas was a young boy still. So he says, كنت خلف النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. He says, كنت خلف النبي يوما صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال يا غلام إني أعلمك كلمات احفظ الله يحفظك احفظ الله تجده تجاهك إذا سألت فاسأل الله وإذا استعنت فاستعن بالله واعلم أن الأمة لو اجتمعت على أن ينفعوك بشيء لم ينفعوك إلا بشيء قد كتبه الله لك وإن اجتمعوا على أن يضروك بشيء لم يضروك إلا بشيء قد كتبه الله عليك رفعت الأقلام وجفت الصحف رواه الترمذي وقال حديث حسن صحيح. وفي رواية غير الترمذي, meaning in other than the Tirmidhi. He says احفظ الله تجده أمامك احفظ الله تجده أمامك تعرف إلى الله في الرخاء يعرفك في الشدة واعلم أن ما أخطأك لم يكن ليصيبك وما أصابك لم يكن ليخطئك واعلم أن النصر مع الصبر وأن الفرج مع الكرب وأن مع العسر يسرا. Now this hadith, and the reason why I actually labeled it as mental illness and how Islam actually talks about this is because it actually goes and talks about it from different angles. Number one, Hamza Rahmoon, if I can ask you, I just made you a host, if you can just admit the guests, please. So if we look at the hadith, where it's actually considering a number of issues. Number one, Ya Ghulam. I'm just going to first translate the hadith, the literal translation. So this is An Abi Abbas, Abdullah ibn Abbas. Abdullah ibn Abbas is the narrator for the hadith. Abdullah ibn Abbas was a young boy, and Abdullah ibn Abbas, just really fast information about Abdullah ibn Abbas. He was born 3 before Hijrah, the 3 years before Hijrah. He's a Sahabi, one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, and he's also one of the most important companions that actually specialized and focused a lot on learning Quran and also learning different details of Islam. Now, Abdullah ibn Abbas himself actually narrated 1,660 hadith. 1,660 hadiths. Abdullah ibn Abbas himself, now you want to remember that Abdullah ibn Abbas is actually the Prophet ﷺ's first cousin. And he himself actually migrated with his father, Al-Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib, to Medina. But then, while they were on their way, the Prophet ﷺ tells them that they were on their way to go to Mecca in order to do the major fath, which is the 8th year. Now, the Prophet ﷺ had direct relationship in teaching Abdullah ibn Abbas, in where the Prophet ﷺ actually made dua for Abdullah ibn Abbas, and he said in the hadith, Allahumma faqihhu fi din wa allimhu at-ta'wil. Ya Allah, give him the knowledge in the deen. Knowledge here, faqih fi deen, is not necessarily related to Islamic legislature, but is knowledge about the general things in the deen, in Islam. وَعَلِّمْهُ التَّأْوِيلِ. عَلِّمْهُ التَّأْويل is another level where he's able to interpret, in other words, derive from the different things that he learned about the deen, derive different matters. In other words, have deep knowledge. When do you have ta'wil? When are you able to interpret? You're able to interpret when two things. When you have deep knowledge in the wordings themselves, in the context of the ayat, and how to understand the context of the situation. So in order to be able to do any type of applying a nas on the waqi', the nas on the reality of the world around you, you actually need to have the ability to understand علمه فقهه في الدين. You need to know the nas, you need to know the text, and the other part is that you need to learn it-ta'wil. You need to understand how to apply that nas, that text, on the reality in the world around us. How do we understand both sides? And he also said, Allahumma allimhu al-kitab, Allahumma allimhu al-hikmah. Ya Allah, let him learn al-kitab, which is an-nas, which is the text. And Ya Allah, teach him hikmah. علمه الحكمة, which is the reality. In other words, how to apply reality on text. Now, the other thing is that Abdullah ibn Abbas was actually one of those, and this is really important to teach our young boys and girls, is that you can be a leader even when you're young. So Abdullah ibn Abbas, the Prophet ﷺ himself, teaches him the main foundations of Islam, and later Umar ibn al-Khattab would even assign him as one of his advisors. We're talking about, a state advising here. We're talking about a position within the government here, which was considered the growing in government at the time, during the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab. Now, Abdullah ibn Abbas, I'm not going to go in so much detail. Abdullah ibn Abbas was not only, the scholar in Islam at the time, but he was also one of those leaders to even lead on political issues, like I had said. Now, Abdullah ibn Abbas, during the time of al-Khulafa, Umar ibn al-Khattab, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, before that, of course, Uthman bin Affan, he had a different role in every single one of them, and at the end, he actually becomes blind and dies in 68-year Hijrah, in the 68-year Hijrah, and Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah, who was actually Ali ibn Abi Talib's son. Oh, no, wait, I got that one wrong. Muhammad ibn al-Hanafi was actually Ali ibn Abi Talib's son, exactly. Now, Abdullah ibn Abbas says the story that he was with the Prophet ﷺ. Kuntu khalfa an-Nabi. So we're looking at if Abdullah ibn Abbas was born 3 years before Hijrah, and Abdullah ibn Abbas didn't meet the Prophet ﷺ until 8 years roughly, until 8th year Hijrah. So we're looking at that he was pretty much around 9-10 years old at the time. So 9-10 years old at the time. So he says, Kuntu khalfa an-Nabi. So he was behind the Prophet ﷺ on the horse that they were riding. Yawman, was one day. And he said, the Prophet ﷺ, Ya ghulam. Oh, ghulam means a young boy, somebody that did not reach the age of puberty yet. Inni u'allimuka kalimat. I am teaching you here a few words. Didn't go in lots of lecturing. Just said, I'm just teaching you a few words. Inni u'allimuka kalimat. Ihfadillaha yahfadk. Preserve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will preserve you. Now, this is a general thing, and then we're going to go in detail. Ihfadillaha tajidhu tujahak. Preserve the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. احفظ الله تجده تجاهك. احفظ الله تجده تجاهك. meaning preserve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. تجده. تجده means you'll find him. تجاهك. تجاهك, there for you. إذا سألت, if you ask, then ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you seek refuge, then seek refuge in Allah. وَعْلَمْ, and know that if the nations united in order to help you or support you or benefit you with something, they will not be able to benefit you with anything unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had decreed it. And if they united to harm you in any way, they will not be able to harm you unless Allah Almighty had decreed it. رُفِعَتِ الْأَقْلَامِ, the pens have risen. وَجَفَّتِ الصُّحُفِ, and the scribes, in other words, those that are scribing, what was scribed is now all dry. There's no more to add on it. You can't wipe it. In another, of course, Rawahu Tirmidhi. Tirmidhi is one of the scholars of Hadith, and he says Hasanun Sahih. In another narration, احفظ الله تجده أمامك, preserve Allah and you'll find him there in front of you. تعرف إلى الله في الرخاء يعرفك في الشدة. Know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala during ease, and he will know you during hardship. And know that whatever ما أخطأك لم يكن ليصيبك, that anything that did not target you will not harm you. And وما أصابك لم يكن ليخطئك, and what was targeted towards you, meaning it was targeting you, it will not miss you. وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ النَّصْرَ مَعَ الصَّبْرِ, and know that victory comes with patience. وَأَنَّ الْفَرَجَ مَعَ الْكَرْبِ, and ease and uplifting hardships comes with every single hardship, and with every hardship there's ease. Now, this is just the literal interpretation for the hadith, but there's really a lot more to it than actually the surface of it. So what does it mean? إِنِّي أُعَلِّمُكَ كَلِمَاتٍ. Now here, kalimat means that it was just a few sentences. These sentences, although just a couple of words, were really to be the foundation of understanding the world and understanding life. But I want you to realize one thing, is that Abdullah ibn Abbas says that he was a ghulam, meaning that he didn't even reach the age of puberty. And therefore, whenever we actually speak about raising or disciplining, it doesn't actually start after the age of puberty. Teaching Aqidah, teaching Islam, teaching all the different things to equip a person when they are adults actually starts from early childhood as well. So here we could see that he was just a young boy that didn't even reach the age of puberty, but still taught him the different details that relate to Aqidah. إِنِّي أُعَلِّمُكَ كَلِمَاتٍ. Don't make it too long, because it will be forgotten. احفظ الله يحفظك. Now, notice that he said احفظ الله, preserve. Why? Because it is part of our own nature that we actually seek security. We seek stability, we seek security. It is part of our nature. Now, even when it comes to, mentally, we usually seek different ways to give us that support. We try to seek education. We put our children in schools in order to give them the future financial support that keeps them away from need, which might put them in different ends. Now, if this is the financial one, here the Prophet ﷺ was teaching him that part of what actually is the major preservation is actually coming from how do you decide your future? How do you decide support for yourself actually starts from the second that you decided to live your life based on. Meaning, the way that you decided to make those decisions, those steps in life, are actually going to determine how lonely, how what type of support you will get throughout your life. Now, when we look at right now with major illnesses, mental illnesses, it really comes, a lot of it. I'm not talking about schizophrenia that can be triggered and can be triggered with through different things, maybe, chemical imbalances in the brain or whatever, or even sometimes can be also triggered by different traumas, etc. But it doesn't mean that if somebody has a mental illness, it doesn't necessarily mean that they were lacking iman. But when we're looking at different sides of mental illnesses, we're looking at, well, how do I help myself get the therapy, get the support? It actually starts with knowing. It actually starts with knowing a number of different ideas that relates to what does it mean by ihfadillah. Ihfadillah and knowing Allah, when we're talking about knowing Allah, it actually includes that center. The center, how do you view the world through? How do you view the world in? How do you see the dynamics of your relationship in this world? You are on this earth living your life. How are you connected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Why is it even important? Because if you yourself are just viewing yourself and seeing that life is just matter in motion, then certainly you're going to feel that it all depends on you alone. If you're going to depend on your own capacity, then when your capacities fail you, then certainly you're going to see the increase in mental disabilities. Why? Because if one is always constantly just focusing on their own capacity, indeed, we vary in the power and the potentials of our capacities. We vary. One can be smarter, the higher IQ than somebody else. Somebody can be probably, they just happen to be lucky to get more money, or etc. If we're going to base our view of the world based on the materialistic side of it, surely we're going to see that we are not as privileged as others may be, and therefore we don't even need to see furthermore, because I could see it from now. I'm less privileged, I'm not as smart, and things are not working with me from the very start. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the Prophet actually said that it actually starts, ihfadillah, your view about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Preserve and understand your view of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and understand your connection between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually starts with knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's number one. And two, that is your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all about the ruh, is all about the soul itself. The soul itself, your mind can actually know, al-aql, your mind can know certain things about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, can learn the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but your ruh can either be connected with that knowledge and see the world through that knowledge, or your own ruh can be so pacified with the different materialistic things and the different materialistic corners, that all it's seeing in the world is the materialistic side of it, and therefore it will lose its understanding of the dunya and life, and it will lose in focusing on the real things that matter in this dunya, which is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you for, which is the purpose of life. The purpose of life itself is actually the main reason why you were created. The main reason why you were created is really for you to be tested on the principle. So here, what principle? What matters is, how did you tahfadillah? How did you preserve the matters of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How did you preserve all the different corners in what yahfadk? that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in order for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to preserve you, in what? In your dunya and in your akhirah. In two corners, in your dunya and in your akhirah. Now why? Because as human beings, we always seek security. We always are afraid of the future. We're not really sure what's coming up. We're afraid if we are depending on our own capacities that it might fail us. All these different things actually come from our view of the world. So the Prophet ﷺ was teaching the Sahabi, احفظ الله يحفظك. Preserve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and put Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's words in practice. احفظ الله, know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and know how to put His words in practice. Meaning what? Meaning put أداء حقوق الله subhanahu wa ta'ala. Give the rights to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be there for you. احفظ الله تجده تجاهك. Preserve the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, preserving the words actually means knowing the truth, and 2, learning how to apply it, and 3, actually applying it. In other words, in putting it into practice. احفظ الله تجده تجاهك. What is that presupposing? That is presupposing that what happens to you in the future is actually all dependent on the past. The past is one way, which is the time that you're living in right now. That is what is going to determine changing what might happen to you in the future. احفظ الله تجده تجاهك. That those moments where you might have made, or you might have taken the wrong decision, in those situations, even those decisions that you made, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be there for you because you decided and you took the decision, you made those steps to actually consider Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's principles as the place and as the reference to go back to in order to turn to making the right decisions. Now, إذا سألت فاسأل الله. Now, a number of corners here. Notice here that it starts with احفظ الله. Here's the ruh, your own ruh, your own soul. 2, تجده تجاهك, العمل, action. And إذا سألت فاسأل الله. And السؤال here is the relationship between you and people. When you're asking people, you're reaching out. And which is part of our own nature, that when we feel that we are not able to do something, where we're acknowledging our own weaknesses, we tend to reach out to people. But here, the Prophet ﷺ is actually saying that your action is fully related to your ruh, and your own ruh can many times determine what actions you take. Now, those two sides of your ruh and your action can also relate to the dynamics of your own society, how you deal with the people around you. إذا سألت فاسأل الله. Now, if you want to ask people, why would you ask people? You usually ask people when you are realizing, when you're taking that moment and you realize that you are not capable of doing something. When you're realizing a moment of your own weakness. So إذا سألت فاسأل الله is actually telling you that when you realize your own weakness, instead of taking that moment to do that feeling of losing hope in your own potentials, take a moment to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rather than focusing on your weaknesses. Rather than focusing on your weakness, go back to, remember, it's a ruh, it's al-amal, and it's also your relationship, the dynamics of the relationship with the people around you. So here, إِذَا سَأَلْتَ فَاسْأَلِ اللَّهِ is actually telling you that when you feel, when you're realizing that weakness, Don't turn to people for help because they are as weak as you are. They may show some potentials, they may show some power, but that power that they had shown is pretty much the power or the weakness that they were able to cover. They were able to hide. So the Prophet ﷺ is saying, إِذَا سَأَلْتَ فَاسْأَلِ اللَّهِ, that when you seek any support, then make sure you ask it from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, he's actually directing him to a very important thing here, that, you know what, just understand that the people around you, they can give you support, but their support is going to be limited. Why? Because their support, it can be the support, it can be the probably words, or they can give you wealth, they can give you so many different sides, but you want to know that in the end, that even when they give you something, and they still have their eyes on what you just took, because they will still feel that that belongs to them and that is theirs. They will still feel, why did I give it to X or Y? And they will give it with greed still inside. Very few people give it with hilm, give it with forbearance, or give it with generosity. So here, the Prophet ﷺ is saying, إِذَا سَأَلْتَ فَاسْأَلِ اللَّهِ, if you want to ask for any support, for any help, make sure you turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that actually gave the rizq for the person that you're asking, gave the intelligence for the person that you are asking for help from, gave the power, the physical power, the list goes on and on. So in other words, rather than asking for a person that they themselves did not give that privilege to themselves, go and ask it from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَإِذَا اسْتَعَنْتَ فَاسْتَعِنْ بِاللَّهِ. And if you want to, what's the difference between السؤال and الاستعانة? السؤال is when you're asking for something, you're actually vocalizing it. But al-isti'ana is when you're depending on somebody, you're depending on something, you're seeking refuge, you're considering them as your place for support. Now here, you could see that it is so common that we would seek support from others, but then these people, as in another hadith, that whoever considers their support, or whoever would seek other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for support, eventually they will take advantage of them. They will take advantage of them. They will be the ones to degrade them, to condescend them. They will be the ones to abuse them. And this is why when we're talking about honor, il-izzah actually comes from having the izzah through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the honor through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's how you will get it. فَاسْتَعِنْ بِاللَّهِ, then seek it through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَعْلَمْ. Now, starting to give facts and understanding the facts about life, about the world around you, about how different things, you have to realize it and keep it in mind, because you could easily go into a self-manipulation, a self-delusion without you realizing. وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ الْأُمَّةِ, and just know, learn, keep in mind that even if all the nation had united to help you with something, they will not be able to help you with anything but something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had decreed for you. In other words, what? When you lose and you think that if only all these people can just support me, or if they would unite, Here, the Prophet ﷺ is actually teaching us that it's not about complaining to more and more people, because at the end is that all these people, even when you combine them to think mathematically speaking, you would assume that if I would combine a weak person and a weak person and another weak person, that is going to be putting some potentials together and hoping that they'll get strong. But the reality is that from a different perspective and a different lens, is that one weak person can actually add on to the weakness and not actually add on to the support. Unless we're looking at potential given with the potential. So here, the Prophet ﷺ is actually saying that they won't be able to help you unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had willed that support to take place. Here's a question we're going to get to. Well, what about if they unite to harm you in any way? Are they going to be able to harm us? They will not be able to harm you unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had willed it to happen. A question might come up. Now, this is really important because when we're talking about mental illness, people would many times accuse, we'll say jinn, we'll say hasad, we'll say trauma, all the different sides to it. They will say, well, all those different things, sihr, all those different things. Well, here it says that if they are to unite in order to harm you, they won't be able to harm you unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed it. So what does that mean? Does that mean that they can still harm you? Well, let me talk about each and every single one of these. When we're looking at jinn, can jinn actually harm us? Well, based on this hadith, there were actually different interpretations to this. Now, interpretation number one is that they can harm us. How does the harm actually take place? Well, the Prophet ﷺ taught us how to make dua from even the different harms. لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد وهو على كل شيء قدير. To actually say this 100 times every morning, to protect you from jinn. So how is it that this is to protect us from jinn? There are certain things that when we look at harm, there are certain things that we don't really know how it harms. We don't know how the harm takes place. So all we could say is that this is part of al-ghaib. This is part of al-unseen. We don't really know all the details about. We just know that the Prophet ﷺ taught us certain dhikr. Part of it is that hadith, that dua, the dhikr that I just mentioned. لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد وهو على كل شيء قدير. To say 100 times every morning to protect you from the jinn harming you. Or even hasad. When the Prophet ﷺ, I'd also like to comment on the issue of jinn. Another thing is that when we're talking about jinn, a lot of times it's associated with sihr. So when we're talking about jinn and sihr, the ayah was actually very clear in talking about how the people that were associated with sihr and how when they related to magic, how that magic was actually affecting, even harming between the husband and the wife. The ayah actually says that and every harm that they were committing or that they were doing, that they were committing to differentiate or cause tension between the husband and the wife. That harm will not happen unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually wills it to happen. Now, in the hadith where it is an authentic hadith, where the Prophet ﷺ, according to the hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari, that the Prophet ﷺ was pricked by magic. And the hadith actually says that the Prophet ﷺ سحر في مشط ومشاطة وجف طلع نخلة ذكر. That the Prophet ﷺ himself was actually pricked by magic. في مشط ومشاطة, there was some of his own hair, and that was tied up with some pollen from male palm trees. and that the Prophet ﷺ didn't know about it. In fact, he himself was actually getting more and more sick and didn't really know anything about it, didn't really know until Jibril alayhi salam came to him, and that isn't until then that the Prophet ﷺ knew where exactly is that evil, that magic, that black magic was done, and he told them that it was in a bi'r, in a well in the near the area where Bani Zurayq were living, and it was done by Labid ibn al-Asam. Labid ibn al-Asam was the one that did this magic. They went and got it from that abandoned well, and the ayat that were recited were al-mu'awwidhat. Al-mu'awwidhat, qul huwallahu ahad, qul a'udhu birabbil falaq, qul a'udhu birabbin nas, each one 3 times. You put them in, you recite them while your palms are open, as if you're going to be washing your face, and then you blow 3 times. Now, we could see that the Prophet ﷺ himself was actually harmed by magic, and we could see that the Prophet ﷺ, there was that teaching by Jibril alayhi salam how to remove this harm. Is sihr the same thing? Well, sihr and jinn and magic. And what about evil eye? Evil eye is the same thing. So how is it قَدْ كَتَبَهُ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكَ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had previously known that somebody was going to harm you with evil eye, or somebody was going to harm you with magic, or somebody was going to harm you from the jinn, or etc. So that's why when we say قَدْ كَتَبَهُ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكَ, it is possible that those harms can happen. In fact, the hadith about sihr, about hasad, that there was the Sahabi who was bathing, but of course the bottom part was covered, and another Sahabi actually praised that Sahabi's body, that it was in good shape and good looking, and he was good looking, and then that Sahabi gets very ill, but then the Prophet ﷺ orders that Sahabi that actually did the evil eye to make wudu, and that water that Sahabi made wudu in would be poured on the Sahabi that Sahabi that was affected by the evil eye. Scholars had different opinions on whether that is poured on top of him or whether that is poured on the sides, meaning on the waist. Al-Maziri, one of the scholars of Al-Malikiyya scholar, said it was to be poured on the sides. You got a question?
What if the person who did the hasad died?
Oh, that's a very good question. What if the person that did the hasad died? So in that situation, all you could do is really al-mu'awwidhat. All you could do is really al-mu'awwidhat, which is qul huwallahu ahad, the qul a'udhu birabbil falaq, qul a'udhu birabbin nas. Read it 3 times and actually wipe on your body and wipe on your face. Now, so this doesn't mean that, okay, that's it, you're going to be doomed for the rest of your life because they had just died. Nope. In the end is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had actually revealed al-mu'awwidhat as a way in order to heal us from even the harms that may surround us. Now look at this. If you look at this hadith is actually talking about the harm that we may get, the worry that we may get due to probably our own weaknesses, or due to other people actually harming us with certain things. So here, whether it's our own weakness or somebody attempting to harm us, those are still insecurities that we still worry about. We might not even sometimes get an answer to who is really harming us, what is really harming me. And I see this very, very often. The other part I would like to say about hasad in magic is that when you read the قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ مِنْ شَرِّ مَا خَلَقَ, مِنْ شَرِّ مَا خَلَقَ, is telling you that there are some of the evils that evil things in the creation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created, مِنْ شَرِّ مَا خَلَقَ, and then you seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the evils of things that may surround you. Why do you seek refuge from the evils of those things that surround you? Because some of those evils you may know about, because you could see it. You could see somebody's making a plot. You could see, certain things, certain harm is coming at you, or some of the things min sharri ma khalaq. There are evil things that might be surrounding you and you don't even know about it. In other words, just as when you think that you can use your cause and effect, you can use your physics to determine where is that harm coming from, in the end is that you've got your weaknesses. You're not going to be able to eliminate every evil thing that is surrounding you, because there's a lot more harm and there's a lot more danger that could be surrounding you, one, in your future, or from things that you do not see or may not even notice. Now that's why he says رُفِعَتِ الْأَقْلَامِ, that everything was already documented. Everything was already decreed before your own creation. In other words, don't lose hope. Don't lose hope in find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is still going to be there to give you the support. Here's somebody, if you say your morning and even evening adhkar, can you have a peace of mind that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not harm, you will not be harmed, or could you get harmed anyways? So number one is that even if somebody might do the adhkar, you can still get harmed. But when you do the adhkar, it's one way of teaching you that even if the harm does happen, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one to turn to seek refuge and help from that harm. All right? The whole idea of even adhkar is to correct your perception of looking at the world, that it's all about cause and effect, and looking all about the materialistic and the surface of the world, the mundane world, that it's all about the mundane things. If I just generate here, it will come there. Don't look at it from a mundane perspective. The whole adhkar is to tell you that anything that you connect to with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He is the magnificent power that is surrounding and even behind all the potentials surrounding you, that the whole life is really connecting to the ruh. And that's why if you look at, Islamic psychology is very different from the secular psychology, because secular psychology more looks at people's behaviors, studying people's motives, studying people's iradat, etc. But Islamic psychology looks at things from a different angle. Islamic psychology looks at things from the asas, from the main part, ruh. Your relationship goes farther with the world around you, with the creation itself, with your own past, with your own future, with the people around you, with how things in your life are planned or determined, or the different sides in your life are far beyond the materialistic capacities and the materialistic surfaces of things. It actually goes farther, where it is talking about ruh. And that's why Islamic psychology, in Islam, they used to call them the ilm al-nufus. They used to call them ilm al-nufus, the knowledge, the ilm, the science of al-nufus, or they even used to call it ilm al-qulub, the knowledge and the science of hearts. How do we go beyond the surface and actually reach out to the heart? Because when your perception is corrected about the world around you, that is the most important step. That is the first and most important way to correct how you perceive trauma, how you perceive harm, and how you perceive your past, and how you perceive your future. Again, when you look at that, it actually starts from al-qalb, because you yourself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala equipped you with the coping skills. But the coping skills, it all is based on al-qalb. You can have all the body power, you can be the six-pack and all that strong person, but shaja'a and being courageous is actually in the qalb. It's not about the body power. Body power is important, but al-qalb, your heart, and how you, instead of focus on fear, but you focus on the principle to do that courageous thing, to live up to the principle, that's what makes al-qalb a lot more important than the materialistic side of our potentials. It actually breaks down to what is in the heart. How do you perceive the potentials that you have? If you're going to depend on your potentials can fail you. And that's when a mental disability will happen, because a mental disability, it will, if we're looking at things from a mental perspective, we would think, well, I've got the power, I studied, then therefore I should pass. If I have that power, then therefore this should happen. If I have the beauty, then I should find a good spouse. If I have this and I did this, then why did the past happen to me? Why did this happen to me? Well, if things were supposed to be going right, then why was my father like this? Why was my mother like this? Why were my brothers to me like this? And then look at trauma from the perspective that, well, that's not how things are supposed to function. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us to focus on al-qulub. And that's why the ayah says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had decreed everything. لِكَيْ لَا تَأْسَوْا عَلَى مَا فَاتَكُمْ وَلَا تَفْرَحُوا بِمَا آتَاكُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed everything in order for you not to despair for something that had passed. It could be a trauma. Well, what about Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam? Didn't he go into this sorrow to the point that he lost his sight out of all that sorrow and sadness that he was living in, losing his child, and his child Yusuf alayhi salam being deserted and being left in the well, and then eventually not finding him ever again? Didn't that actually happen? It can happen. It is part of our own human nature that we can feel that sorrow. But even Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam, your body can still fail you at times, in where no matter how strong you are in connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your body may still react to the different traumas that happen to you. But when you look at Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam, when they came to him and told him that even your other son is now gone, he says in the end, he says, لا تيأسوا من روح الله. Don't lose hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, روح الله, in the potentials of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because he never lost in the potential of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He never lost hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's abilities, but his own body might have reacted to the trauma, but his iman was still strong. His iman was still strong, and he just says, وَأَعْلَمُ مِنَ اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. I know what you don't know, because I'm connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then because he had his full iman, he just says that I can smell Yusuf. لَوْلَا أَن تُفَنِّدُونَ. You're just going to think of me as if I had lost my mental ability. You're going to think that I just went into another Alzheimer's. I'm not able to think right. لَوْلَا أَن تُفَنِّدُونَ. But I know exactly what I'm feeling, and I know exactly what I'm sensing. What senses did he depend on? He depended, وَأَعْلَمُ مِنَ اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. He complained to who? And he would always complain. And when even his own sons, they said, now there you are, تَفْتَأُ تَذْكُرُ Yusuf. Do you still remember Yusuf? You still remember all that? And instead of moving on, they're now accusing him of living that trauma, and it's affecting him. But he just says, إِنَّمَا أَشْكُو بَثِّي وَحُزْنِي إِلَى اللَّهِ. I only complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I only complain. And it could be the huzn, it could be the sorrow that could be directly related to it, or even the different sorrow that might have been from different angles still affecting my weaknesses. But who does he complain to? He complains to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because many out there will take advantage of your sorrow, will take advantage of those weaknesses that you will be exposing to. they will be taken advantage of you. So here Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam was teaching them, إِنَّمَا أَشْكُو بَثِّي وَحُزْنِي إِلَى اللَّهِ. Despite all the sorrow, I only complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because he knew that the people around him were not going to be able to give him the support, and that it has actually gone beyond even their human capacity. رُفِعَتِ الْأَقْلَامِ وَجَفَّتِ الصُّحُفِ. الأقلام, all the pens that were scribing what was going to happen in the future and everything. رُفِعَت. What scribes are we talking about? There are two. Number one, the scribe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had actually created, the pen, before even the creation. Number two, the scribe when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as in Hadith Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, where the Prophet ﷺ, in the Hadith, it actually says, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then sends al-malak, يرسل إليه الملك ويؤمر بكتابة أربع. Then he is ordered to write four things. What are they? The rizq, the ajal, شقي أو سعيد. The rizq, what kind of money, what kind, and rizq is not only in money, but husband, children, wealth, the different intelligence, all those different things, the rizq, they're privileges that you're given. And amal, what kind of actions are you doing? What decisions will you be taking? And ajal, how long are you going to live? And shaqiyun aw sa'id, are you going to be part of those that will be shaqi, that will be shaqi, meaning that they will be living in sorrow, they will be living in despair. Why? As a result of their wrong actions, the bad deeds that they were committing. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said shaqi, that they will be, the literal word shaqi, it actually means that they're naughty, that they're living in despair. But here, shaqi, the connotation of it is actually telling me that they are actually living in that sorrow, in that sadness, as a result of their wrong behavior, that they were distant from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shaqiyun aw sa'id, or are they going to be happy? Happy, but the connotation given me here that they're happy, they're living some level of stability, some level of, feeling pleasure on the inside, but that the word is really, the metaphor of it is referring that the person is living based on the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, putting the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on ground. وَجَفَّتِ الصُّحُفِ. جَفَّتِ الصُّحُفِ, that all the suhuf meaning the books, were now closed up. What books? The books that will come back even on Judgment Day, where you will lay out your arms and the books will be flying up above you that contain every single thing that you had done. Now, in the other hadith, in the other narration, احفظ الله تجده أمامك, that it is all based on what actions you take, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be there for you. In other words, do the right thing, and you will see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was actually leading you to the right direction. تجده أمامك, meaning you'll find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala there. Don't give up. Don't give up feeling, oh, I need to take this haram, or hurry in taking something haram because I might lose a privilege. No, even if it may look harder, if you make this decision, don't make fast decisions. Take a harder decision and abide by the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that will lead to a correct and a right position where you will find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala there for you. Don't rush things. You can steal and think, I've got the money that I wanted, but it can seem like you got the money. So why go through education and get a job and get all that and go the hard path when I could just simply steal? So here, you could see the same thing, that know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, do the right thing, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be there for you, giving you the honor. And this is one very important thing in this lesson. It's all about giving you honor and keeping all the evil things away from you. Now, تعرف إلى الله في الرخاء يعرفك في الشدة. Know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when there's ease, when you have got no problems, when everything is working out, when you see you've got the body, you've got the health, you've got the wealth, you've got all those different privileges. Well, use those privileges to promote haqq, to promote truth, to promote living up to the principle, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be there to give you the support that you need when things go wrong. When things go wrong, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be there. And subhanAllah, this actually reminds me of another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ actually said in that other hadith that whoever gives Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's kind of like this, when your ham is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when your focus is on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will yakfika ham dunya and al-akhirah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will prevent all the different dilemmas that may be surrounding you in this world and the akhirah. In other words, let the main issue, your focus, the dilemma, the hardship that you are concerned about, the challenges that you're concerned about, let it be the challenges that the ummah is facing. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of the challenges that you might be facing in life. Therefore, when we say ta'arraf ila Allah fi ar-rakha, let that ease times, let those ease times be the times that you get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before going and turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala during hardship. It actually starts when things are easy, when you've got all the privileges surrounding you. وَاعْلَمْ, and know مَا أَخْطَأَكَ لَمْ يَكُنْ لِيُصِيبَكَ, and know that what will not target you, will not happen to you, no matter how many powers, how many people unite to harm you, it's not going to harm you. What is that telling us? That don't worry about all the different threats that are surrounding you. Don't be shallow in how you perceive harm, trauma, good, privileges. Don't be shallow in your understanding or how you see these things around you, but connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He's the one that has the power to keep all those evils from you and preserve the good to you. وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ النَّصْرَ مَعَ الصَّبْرِ, and know that victory, what is victory? Victory could be in your life, could be in your degree, success in different ways. Nasr could be in any type of success, in your degree, in your marriage, in your work, in your financial areas, etc. All those different areas, they need some kind of sabr. There's no way that you can get to success unless you put in some sabr, unless you put in some patience. Meaning what? And this is really important that we're missing out on today, which is, how do we cope? When we cope, there are a number of things in how we cope with. How do we keep that coping in us? Number one is knowing that no usr will last forever. No hardship will last forever. This is the first thing you want to know. Number two, you want to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that's controlling the different things without you realizing. Therefore, have that coping, those coping therapies, those coping skills there for you to give you the support. What cope? Coping actually starts with coping to stay on the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does it mean? الصبر على الطاعة. To have sabr in obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. 2. الصبر على ترك المعصية. Sabr on leaving sin. That's the sabr. And not only that, when you're looking at sabr, those two things are teaching you how to cope with trauma that might have happened in the past, or even things you are keen on seeing happening in the future. وَأَنَّ الْفَرَجَ مَعَ الْكَرْبِ. So this is teaching us that the Prophet ﷺ said, well, it's nasr ma'a sabr. You gotta teach yourself how to cope. You gotta teach yourself that patience. You gotta teach yourself that not because you've got a certain feeling that you necessarily have to get it to the surface. Not because you're feeling angry that you necessarily let your anger determine your behavior. Not because you're feeling sad, it doesn't mean that you lose hope and you commit suicide. You go beyond those feelings by having that sabr. Just hang in there, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be there to give you the support. وَأَنَّ الْفَرَجَ مَعَ الْكَرْبِ. That with every hardship, faraj, ease, opening. To what the word karb, there's actually two things to it. The word karb actually means, by definition, it's like when you're closing something tightly. So the word faraj actually comes when you're untightening something, when you're opening it up. So karb, it's another way of describing that when you're feeling that tightness, when you're feeling that your chest is closing up on you, and just that moment, when you feel that I cannot even breathe, when you are losing any hope, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, Inna ma'al usri yusra. With every hardship that comes, ease comes with it. Not comes after it, but comes with it. It is all about in nasr ma'a sabr. Patience is what actually brings success. وَأَنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. And with every hardship, there's always going to be ease. العسر. What's the difference with العسر and الكرب and الفرج? الفرج and الكرب, I talked about it, that it's telling you, it's giving you a different connotation, where it's that closeness, that tightness versus that openness, where something is either very tight on you, or is that you're taking that ruh, you're taking that nafas, you're taking that that breathing, you're taking that relaxation, a moment to relax, a moment to all that. How do you take the moment to relaxation? احفظ الله يحفظك. وَأَنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. العسر is different than yusr, and it's looking at it from a different angle. اليسر is ease. العسر is like just like when you squeeze something. العسر is like when you squeeze something tightly. العسر can also be left. When العسر can also be left, in where left meaning it's going the wrong direction. اليسر is when something is going the right direction. So every time when you see that something is just going the wrong direction, you have faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring things in the right direction. But what is the muftah? What is the key? That in nasr ma'a sabr. Learn how to cope. Not because you want something to happen fast. It doesn't mean it should. It is all based on sabr. Sabr is the main pillar of akhlaq. It's the main pillar of akhlaq. Jazakumullah khairan, everyone. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. So somebody is saying, هذه ليست دعوة للتواكل وعدم حل المشاكل. Absolutely. This is not telling people that, just leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will solve everything for you. It actually means that you take the precautions. You have to اتخاذ الأسباب. In other words, you have to take the necessary measurements, and then you leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But leaving it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means that after you have taken the necessary measurements. Here somebody also says المعوذات is the best, because a lot of time we don't know which people to suspect. And by the way, speaking of that, if somebody, it is actually fard or wajib, if somebody, let's say, suspected that you did hasad on them, if you expected somebody that, yeah, I really feel that Jumana, or whatever name, she was the one that did hasad on me, and you want her to do that wudu. The wudu is just the general wudu, not including the private area, of course. To do the wudu, and it's combined, the water is combined in a toast or something, and then they would pour it. By Islam, she has to actually do the wudu, and in order to remove that evil eye. And here's another one. And also, if you know who that person may not want to help out of jealousy, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gifted us with the mercy of adhkar and mu'awwidat. Absolutely. Another thing, somebody says this hadith has so many answers for today's discussion. Women depend on job and degree, and everyone missed the real one to depend on is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Well, it's taken from al-asbab, so it is also taking the measurements, the necessary means in order to help you in your life. So it's okay to work on getting a degree, to get a job, to get rizq. That's absolutely part of اتخاذ al-asbab. That's considering the necessary measurements, and not just waiting, well, I just want the rizq to come over to me. It's taking the necessary measurements that, okay, I will study, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will inshallah open the paths to probably me getting a degree, and probably me getting a job later on, and there's the higher chance, there's the probability of me getting a job with a degree is definitely going to be higher than with, or even the wealth that's coming in is definitely going to be higher if I were to have a good degree. Somebody that has a degree in medicine is expected to have better income than somebody that has a degree in Islamic studies. All right. Now that doesn't mean give up on Islamic studies. All right. But this is just general. So with somebody that has a degree in medicine, they're expected to make, for example, 100 or 150 grams a year, or even more. It depends on what they have. But somebody that probably has an Islamic studies degree, most likely they're not going to get a job, because our institutions don't even hire those that have Islamic studies degrees, and they're more likely to probably work and open up a business than actually go into a masjid or even an institution to get a job through their Islamic studies degrees. Because the ummah, alhamdulillah, we're living in a society where everyone is a mufti, and everyone is equipped with Islamic ilm, and therefore no need for Islamic knowledge. Allahul Musta'an. This is sarcastically speaking. This is not true. This is sarcastically speaking. This is the situation that we're in. Allahul Musta'an. But does it mean that, alhamdulillah, there's no better ilm to study than al-ilm, Allahumma faqihhu fi din wa allimhu at-ta'wil. There's no better ilm than actually studying Islamic studies and studying our deen, because it's not about the money that you make. There are so many things that are more valuable than how we price things. The things that we may have that are that we may not have a price on them can be a lot more valuable than things that you can buy. Michael Sandel, actually wrote a book, What Money Cannot Buy. And he's a Harvard professor, and I believe philosophy and politics or something like that. I forgot what it was. And in his book, he goes in details about the the capitalist economy, and how economy today is so focused on the money of things and the price of things, and that this is taking our focus towards a different direction, and that there's so many things that money should not be able to buy. And that's actually true, that there are principles that money should not be able to buy. And that's exactly right. And money when we're talking about money and value, there are so many different things that you could have that are actually priceless. That are so valuable, that are priceless, that you may not recognize, you may not know. And that's the thing, is that many times, especially with those that probably went through a certain trauma, you probably went through some hardship, something that happened in the past, but you didn't recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had compensated you in different ways. Probably gave you health, probably gave you intelligence, probably equipped you with a different power that you didn't realize. Where do we get that from? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ قُتِلَ مَظْلُومًا فَقَدْ جَعَلْنَا لِوَلِيِّهِ سُلْطَانًا فَلَا يُسْرِفْ فِي الْقَتْلِ. Whoever is killed in an oppressive manner, then we will give, in other words, compensate liwaliyihi, compensate those that are his guardians, meaning the people that are his family. We will compensate them with a sultan, with a power. فَلَا يُسْرِفْ فِي الْقَتْلِ, meaning let them not take advantage and abuse in killing others. Meaning what? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will compensate them, even if that person was oppressed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will still compensate him by even giving the power to those that came after him, his family, etc. And that's why when we look at that ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَمَّا الْغُلَامُ فَكَانَ أَبَوَاهُ مُؤْمِنَيْن, that the young lad, he was given the rizq because he had an ancestor that was a salih person. He had an ancestor, أَكَانَ أَبْوَاهُ صَالِحَيْن, that they were صالحين, not mu'minain, but صالحين, that they were actually pious. They were actually pious, that he had a mother and the pious ancestry was the reason why he was actually given that rizq. Actually, I confused two ayat here, in where the two aitam boys were the ones that were given the rizq, because they had كان أبوهما صالحا that they were that's why they were given the rizq when that wall was going to fall. So I confused that one, confused the stories. But in the end is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will compensate even when you are harmed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will compensate you from لا يحتسب وما يتق الله يجعل له مخرجا ويرزقه من حيث لا يحتسب. And whoever would have taqwa, and here taqwa is احفظ الله يحفظ, whoever would have the taqwa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them the rizq من حيث لا يحتسب, from where they did not expect. And this is النصر مع الصبر. النصر مع الصبر. جزاكم الله خيرا, everyone. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for those that are facing different traumas and different hardships, we would always remind them, احفظ الله يحفظك. Hold on to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. النصر مع الصبر. Success comes with patience, and with every hardship comes ease. And إن مع العسر يسرا. وصلى على سيدنا محمد. And السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.